Hello, and welcome to this evening's Empower Hour with Jim Gilbert, who will be enlightening us on the concept of community virtual power plants. If you're not already on the mailing list, sign up again at empowerfuture.org. And you'll also find all of our previous Empower recordings on that page. And it's kind of exciting. We started this in January of 2021. So we've had quite a run of amazing and interesting speakers on a wide variety of topics. I'd encourage you to check it out. And now I'm going to read the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge with respect as non-native people that the land on which we stand, live, and learn is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. We also recognize the 48 contemporary tribal nations that are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. We honor elders past, present, and future, and those who have stewarded this land throughout generations. We also recognize that our government, academic, and cultural institutions and our nation itself were founded upon and continue to enact exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. May this acknowledgement demonstrate a commitment to working to dismantle ongoing legacies of settler colonialism, oppression, and inequities, and to recognize the hundreds of Indigenous nations who continue to resist, live, create, and uphold their sacred relations across their lands. Let us seek to understand what it means to be in right relationship today with the traditional stewards of this land and with this land itself and with all the creatures that inhabit it. And now I would like to introduce our guest. Jim Gilbert is a retired, innovative, and accomplished consultant and former R&D technical fellow with Medtronic. He's got over 40 years of electronic product design and development experience working across functional and disciplinary lines, from locomotives to noise cancellation and medical devices. He's designed and developed new technologies and products from ideation through FDA clearance and beyond. He is an inventor on nearly 60 US patents and is author or co-author on over a dozen peer-reviewed publications. So needless to say, we are delighted to have him. It turns out in his retirement, while he has been trying to enjoy more fly fishing and outdoor activities with his wife and family, former clients apparently are still in touch, and he has a strong sense of obligation to give back to the community that he has called home for 40 years, almost 40 years. So his paying it forward sparked this journey that he began just about a year ago, it sounds like, and he's made an amazing amount of progress in understanding the community's relationship with the grid, and that's what he's talking about tonight. So thank you so much, Jim, for being here. We really appreciate it. Let me hand it over to you.
Hello, thank you. Hello, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you today about the powers of prosumer-owned distributed energy resources aggregated into a community-based virtual power plant. I'll make a case here today for a sustainable energy utility in the city of Boulder that could act as the coordinating facilitator, planner, and procurer for these aggregations into a clean and resilient integrated distributed grid of the future. While I'm going to talk about Boulder as an example, I want you to know that this case is general and can be applied to many Colorado cities and possibly other states. So regardless of whether Boulder remains in or out of its franchise agreement with Xcel Energy, Boulder desires to align their local grid objectives and goals with their energy planning and execution. Even if current energy partner Xcel Energy meets Boulder's net zero grid goal by 2030, it will likely miss one or more objectives, creating gaps. Prosumer-owned distributed energy resources, or DERs, if planned, sited, and facilitated by a community-based sustainable energy utility, an SEU, can play a significant role in filling these gaps. DERs aggregated in these prosumer-based community virtual power plants, or CVPP with a small c, empowered the community to co-invest in its grid and meet the community's objectives and goals. CVPPs, including networks of microgrids, are a potentially powerful economic and health and well-being multiplier for the community. Spoiler alert, though, here's the last slide first. So if you can't sit through all of this, you can see where this is headed and tap out. But rather than going through the whole slide now, here's the short story I'm going to tell you. Start simple, focusing on the underserved and business sectors, and riffing on expanding on the systems we already have in place here in Boulder and in Colorado. Plan and facilitate the procurement for the long run, assuming orchestrating networks of our distributed energy resources into VPPs for the community's mutual benefit will eventually meet requirements of interoperability, accountability, and the full value stack compensation on both the supply and the demand sides. Let's keep our options open for allowing technological and market innovations at all times. Don't get siloed or locked in. Distributed open architectures of systems are the most robust, whereas proprietary and closed architectures, in my experience as an engineer, are not generally sustainable. So here's the quick 411 on some of the acronyms, because I do have an acronym soup up here, and we had some jokes about that earlier. CVPP is a community virtual power plant. An SEU is a sustainable energy utility. C&I is our commercial and industrial or business sector, as most of us will call it. BTM means behind the meter. V2H, V2B, V2G, V2X, oh my gosh, is electric vehicle to home, building, or grid, or everything. And finally, on this screen anyway, NWAs means non-wires alternatives, or grid speak, for grid solutions that do not require the traditional infrastructure. The key here about an SEU is that it is financially self-sufficient entity focused on facilitating a decentralized renewable energy ecosystem within its community. I suggest that from the electricity side, an SEU in Colorado should be patterned at a local distribution level after the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority, or CETA, sorry, another acronym, in coordinating and facilitating local distribution system planning and procurement activities. This would aid our prosumers to trade on their energy and services in an organized wholesale market. Yes, Xcel Energy and the rest of Colorado's utilities will be required to be part of organized wholesale electricity markets by 2030. The original SEU concept is credited to John Byrne at the Center for Energy and Environmental Policy at the University of Delaware. But I credit Ann Arbor's Missy Stultz with making me and our team here aware of this model. Note that this idea and the Ann Arbor instant of it also look at heating and replacement of gas. Those are very important ideals. I am going to assume here that is going to be part of the responsibility of any SEU Boulder might contemplate for sure, but it does not affect the model of planning, procuring, and placing distributed energy resources within a virtual power plant that will be the focus in this presentation. A virtual power plant is not a microgrid. It is an orchestrated aggregation of prosumer, hopefully, distributed energy resources like thermostats, yes, rooftop solar, yes, and battery. That is distinct from demand response programs that many of you may be familiar with, in that it provides a wider array of grid services, more value. And to quote the DOE on this, that can balance electricity demand and supply and provide utility scale and utility grade services like a traditional power plant. VPPs may consist of microgrids, but they are geographically spread out. And they may or may not be islanded from a grid like a microgrid can be. VPPs are allowed in Colorado. Several utilities here are already pursuing VPs in a variety of forms. And Boulder has recently initiated a pilot that is a vertically integrated VPP, at least to my knowledge, that is going to be exclusively operated by Xcel Energy, that is called Primetime VPP. That pilot is not necessarily a microgrid. I want to be clear on that. CU has had a capstone project for microgrids and operates a microgrid, yes, but again, VPPs are not necessarily microgrids, and CU may or may not be involved in that. We'll also talk about alternative structures for VPPs later. One may notice that I changed the word customers from the original slide that DOE provided to prosumers. This is important. It might be worth a moment then to define that, since Colorado is at the forefront of defining the role and compensation of its prosumers. So what's a community VPP, and how do they relate to the concept of prosumers? I first came across this concept when looking into Bill Althouse's Energy Farmers Co-op VPP, and I love this idea. This graphic is based on the thesis by Luc Van Summeren concerning the community VPP project he has facilitated since 2017 in the European Union. We will start with the passive consumer on the lower left corner. They consume energy and they write checks, as Bill points out. They might belong to a demand response program, but they are weekly compensated for this service. The prosumer in the middle, which many of us will recognize, owns some solar panels and may be compensated by net metering, but they cannot trade their electricity with their neighbors in any smart way. This results in an inequity that is called cost shifting to non-DERS owners, such as even our energy community energy owners up at the top. Ron Sinton has discussed this problem in a previous Empower Hour, so I won't belabor the point. This prosumer is still in a passive involvement with the grid. So how can this prosumer be more proactive and smart about sharing the resources and services with the community? Preferably on the wholesale market. By adding the distributed storage graduating to smart devices in their electrification mix and joining a virtual power plant. These smart prosumers cash checks. Here, a smart prosumer joins their neighbors in a community-based virtual power plant, which could be part of a larger network of VPPs, of course, and those could be of all sorts. But in this CVPP instance, they not only own their own distributed energy resources, they can trade their resources and grid services with others within the CVPP, resulting in improving their community's grid and generating economic value savings for all grid-connected participants within the community. While they have not detached from the grid, and they may require occasional energy imports or exports with the rest of the wholesale market, remember, they and the community are now co-investors, and this is a key. They have a vested interest in the service quality of their own local distribution grid. That means empowerment. That means local skilled jobs as well as prosumer income and investments are circulated within the local economy while simultaneously cleaning up the grid, providing local health and well-being and resilience. This is what I mean by circulating the electrons and the dollars locally as an economic multiplier. So, first things first, when you do any strategic planning exercise, you should start by identifying your objectives and then aligning them with your policy goals. And make sure the plan and its executions are in lockstep with all these throughout, whether we are talking about medical products or your family budget. So what does Boulder want from its grid? What are the policy objectives and goals, and how do those align with planning and execution? And here we see that Boulder has set objectives. There are goals, and we'll notice on the next slide that they are in alignment, but maybe not, there may be some gaps. So I suggest here today that Boulder must include assigning some numbers, especially to reliability and resilience to individuals and the community for evaluating the soundness of any of the investment decisions that go on and make at any point along the way about their grid. That includes connecting long-term goals to anything from upgrading transformers or everyday maintenance or even decisions about when to run your own household appliances. So, what are or should be the objectives? According to the Institute of Electronic and Electrical Engineers, Power and Energy Society, a modern, flexible grid is sustainably equitable, physically and cyber secure, safe, reliable, resilient, and affordable. This is the minimum bar. Like medical product design, you can't skip these. People's lives depend on these. But quantifying them and doing a hazard assessment and risk analysis is not a simple task. I've been involved in this for a number of years. While some of these terms have meaning and even standards at the state and the national levels, the whole community should also be involved in defining what these mean and what it looks like for them, especially the resilient part we will focus on. So what are the key goals? Zero net emissions pollution as soon as practicable for public health and well-being. Again, that is from the IEEE. Boulder's current plan set 2030 for net zero electricity due to their assessment of the urgency, and its objectives are consistent with those of the IEEE Power and Energy Society and the IPCC. For purposes of this discussion, I recommend that such an assessment of whether our local grid meets those needs or not is something that the community needs to collectively decide through a transparent and open process. A process that is not as entirely transparent and open at present for the average Boulderite, I understand. Therefore, I am first proposing here that a sustainable energy utility, regardless of whether we are in a franchise agreement or not, provides a facilitating vehicle for actively engaging our community in that process better. We have a model in the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority, the CETA, that has already set up a process that I think is pretty good. Like Denver states in their memorandum of understanding with Xcel, Boulder is also a Colorado home rule municipality. That means Boulder is responsible for protecting the public health and safety of its residents with all the reasonable licensing and police powers to make that happen. So Boulder has a plan, and it has begun on that plan in agreement with Xcel Energy. That plan, however, has gaps. Xcel has not met the reduction goals, and there remains still a 20% unaddressed gap between Boulder's net zero goal and the state's goal. Boulder has set 2030, the state has set 2050. Xcel only projected Boulder's distributed energy resources, like our rooftop solar and community solar, to contribute no more than 1% to the total reduction of emissions. That also did not include active role for the community in facilitating its commercial and industrial demand response programs that Xcel is currently managing. The point is, I believe that community has so far been missing an opportunity to take control of its own destiny in partnering with its business sector for more impactful mutual benefits with distributed energy resources. This was an area of opportunity that was actually identified by the Brattle Group in a 2022 study on demand response programs for Xcel Energy right here in Colorado. The Brattle Group, although finding that Xcel's demand response programs were definitely among the best in the U.S., concluded, however, that they could be significantly improved. They proposed something that was basically virtual power plants with prosumer types of compensation, without actually using those words. That is because this is likely because this was before the 2024 legislation was passed, but I don't want to think about that too much, which is important. The 2024 legislation was passed requiring Xcel to support VPPs, including their third-party VPPs, and provide for prosumer compensation and their aggregated participation on the wholesale electricity market that Colorado will have by 2030. We know we want a clean grid, and we are progressing. There is some good news here. Utility scale wind, solar, and storage are rapidly gaining ground as they prove to be lower cost and faster to build in many cases. But to be honest with ourselves, we simply can't permit, build, and interconnect all of that transmission and distribution to those clean utility scale resources fast enough, let alone economically cover the last few percentage points to achieve that net zero. That last couple percentage could cost much, much more than most of the alternatives. This was a previous Empower Hour discussion with Ken Regelson. That at least was the conclusion also of a report by the Colorado Energy Office stating that current state policy was sufficient to meet nearly 96% of clean energy by 2040. There would be a residual reliance on gas, however, and this was deemed to be unavoidable for the current policies in place by an NREL study, independent, but still for Xcel, of the future weather conditions. This was true even with imports from out of state for clean wind and solar being added into the mix. This study's bottom line was that current policy is likely to be the lowest net cost. However, there was a bit of apples and oranges comparison buried in here. The study concluded that hydrogen and geothermal electricity generation, along with small modular nuclear reactors, could be brought to bear, which are all frankly controversial and unproven, at least from my engineering judgment. The only 100% clean path that was viable and proven, other than utility scale wind, solar, and storage, was doubling to tripling the reliance on prosumer distributed energy resources. The report said that DERS owners are the ones who will be making the investment and not the utilities, and that vehicle to grid or vehicle to everything coordination would play a key role. The Brattle Group, in a separate but unrelated study, concluded that the aggregated DERS could save the day, first in the previously mentioned study for Xcel, and later one for VPPs on a national level. They concluded that VPPs could save 40% to 60% over the investment options and costs. That last general study was actually based on averaged VPP statistics from around the country for a fictional utility, yes, set in Colorado, that just happened to be the size of Xcel. So the last point on this slide is a key. None of these studies included looking at the value of reliability and resilience that VPPs bring to the party. And I'm trying to break this up with some humor. May not be that very good at this, but this is nerd humor. But this sums up the frustrations that many of us probably feel with the centralized approach that we've been taking to solving the issues of electrification and load growth. We do think we could be a bit more flexible. So, what is the value proposition of virtual power plants? The value of distributed energy resources like solar and battery or smart thermostats as a means to clean up the grid is very well known, but the concept of their aggregation and coordination as a way to provide not just clean energy, but a full value stack of savings and services to the grid and the community is a relatively new concept. Hence, compensation of the prosumer for these services is key. The avoidance of a grid outage, as had occurred in California in 2022, should result in performance payments by the operating utility to the aggregators and thereby the prosumer participants in compensation for their services. This just compensation is something that Rocky Mountain Institute has pointed out did not happen for the participants in demand response programs in that same California case. One aspect that may not be well valued or compensated for yet, again, is the value of resilience to the community and the distributed energy resource owners. So we'll come back to explaining this concept within its various market models later. So what is the value of resilience? And how could that affect the value proposition for businesses, households, and the community in this discussion? First point here is that outage time per event, or SAIDI, is clearly going up because of extreme weather-related events. The frequency of these events, or SAIFI, is not as clear of a trend, but that is because the publicly available Energy Information Administration data only goes back 10 years, not 25, as the chart on the right is showing a bit more clearly. Xcel's Public Service of Colorado, frankly, cannot control the weather, and placing their non-weather related performance in perspective, They actually do rank in the upper quartile of all IOUs on reliability across the US. While Boulder has experienced outages, they are dwarfed by the outages seen in other communities, frankly, especially the San Luis Valley. Weather is pretty much guaranteed to keep this all at a non-zero number, however. We will have to live with grid outages, no matter who is in charge of our electricity. Point is, a public power utility, such as a community-based sustainable energy utility, while offering no guarantee of fewer outages due to extreme weather events, does have more skin in this game. This means it has potential for providing more flexible and responsive community-oriented distribution level services in the future. The value of resilience or value of lost load, VOLL, is the value, a commonly understood stand-in for placing a value to resilience. So here, residential grid participants don't feel much in terms of loss during an outage. This is well understood. However, the business sector and many of those whose safety and livelihoods do depend on power feel disproportionate losses, as you can tell here. Nearly 96% of the dollars here are lost by our small and medium and large CNI. Tools like the interruption cost estimator, or ICE, that I've used here can help put some perspective on the magnitude of this problem with such outages and their effects. It is due for an update soon, but currently it is in 2016 dollars, and I had to convert these to 2024 dollars. Here we see that businesses, that is non-residential CNI, and those who work at these businesses in this hypothetical community the size of Boulder in Colorado, are taking the vast majority of the hit, ultimately impacting the community's bottom line economics in an enormous way. This is why storage and backup makes so much more sense to the business sector than the residential sector. For instance, I lost $9 worth of ice cream and fish in my freezer in the last outage. However, under the Sun, Black Belly, Santo, those restaurants all lost thousands of dollars, to say nothing of their employees losing critical hours of work as they live from paycheck to paycheck. Now, under the Sun is gone. And this says nothing about folks depending on electricity for their medical or health needs, which makes it absolutely invaluable to them. We can also see that the value of electricity during an outage goes from about our 16 cents per kilowatt hour we pay on blue sky days to almost $500 per kilowatt hour for those who are unserved small businesses on the black sky outage days. Solar plus storage is a recognized resilience solution. This is an example of a comparison of solar plus behind the meter, or BTM, storage for a time of use savings and resilience that is possible in a place like Boulder as we switch over to time of use billing. Behind the meter is allowed here with a permit that demonstrates you meet all of the grid safety and interoperability requirements. The kicker I want to point out here is that adding vehicle to home, which can turn a somewhat marginal proposition like above to one where you might weigh more heavily towards the time of use savings than the resiliency itself, to a solution that would hopefully be the best of both worlds. That is, a TOU, time of use savings, and the significantly longer resilience for those outages that are likely to come due to weather extremes. In those cases, your very large car battery, which tends to be about 4 to 8 times larger than the typical solar installation, can be used to keep your house lit for days. This is an example taken from a combination of sources: Energy Sage, Solar Reviews, PV Calc, and any number of others. I am not recommending that you use my numbers here, though, folks, to make a purchase today. This is an illustrative example, and know that I am working now in concert with some other CU resources I have connected with, and am open to collaboration with others on a more rigorous calculation. But believe me, these numbers were taken from all of these other tools, and I kind of cobbled this together. There are calculators out there, but none had all of the none were open source, and none combined all the events that I looked for here. So now we can see what we've just built is actually a microgrid. Once you get to a point where you can shut yourself off from a grid and survive, you have become a microgrid. So we see that solar plus storage can add value to the C&I or a small business in a way that is sustainable on the blue sky days and paying in collecting cash as a prosumer for your time of use savings. But can we build on that for community emergencies in the black sky days as well? The Colorado Resilience Framework calls for a network of resiliency hubs to provide food, access, shelter, power, and other critical services during emergencies. But what does a resiliency hub look like? And here we have an example, a tested example of a resiliency hub network in New Orleans. There are plenty of building-sized or single premises-sized microgrid resiliency solutions for emergencies during black sky days, but making them valuable to the community means sharing their power during the blue sky days, when there isn't an emergency. In the case of New Orleans, the Community Lighthouse Project, which established microgrids in the form of resiliency hubs, they are sharing their solar during the day. And they get their first test, or receive their first test during Hurricane Francine, and they passed. Community Lighthouse Project concluded that virtual power plants is going to be the way of their future. So also did Rocky Mountain Institute's report for Holy Cross Energy on resiliency here in Colorado. I suggest reading Holy Cross Energy's report, Working Together Toward a More Resilient Future. Note that not all such of these resiliency hubs necessarily need a diesel generator backup. It is conceivable that some may be necessary for some particular locations to be prudent. Some communities have come up with a plan, however, for emergency mobile storage as well as mobile gas generators in conjunction with their hubs. I would direct you to look at the Footprint project for an example. I suggest in this case then, some portion of this system should be filled in by providing bidirectional charging hubs, or the V2B, as that so that members of the participating VPP or those taking shelter can share their vehicle storage. Behind the meter storage projects of this sort are allowed in Louisiana as well as in Colorado. Community Lighthouse wants to share their battery power too, not just their solar. They envision sharing through a community VPP as a network of their microgrids, a network of the resiliency hubs, just as envisioned by Colorado, and as a matter of fact, just as envisioned right now by the city of Boulder. Virtual power plants are novel in Louisiana law, but are a concept that is allowed under current Colorado law, which is actually nation leading. There would be a question of ownership of the VPP, of course, and how it and its participants are compensated, we'll discuss a little bit later. This is still being duked out actively in the Colorado PUC. However, Together New Orleans is looking to recruit others in their community to join their CVPP and providing more little lighthouses like this throughout the city. This seems like an obvious step one could take in Colorado as well, and it is a step that is consistent with the state's resiliency framework and its microgrid roadmaps that you will find at the Colorado Energy Office. So here we go. How can we do this? How can Boulder help itself to close the gaps and robustly approach meeting its objectives and goals? Let's facilitate the process through a sustainable energy utility and start with some simple existing stuff that we have in place, and then work our way up from there. So what do I mean by starting simple? Thermostats. Oh my gosh. Heating, ventilating, and air conditioning virtual power plants like this example in Arizona. I believe that this sort of virtual power plant would be on about a scale of 25 to 40 megawatts by comparison. And if I'm not mistaken, and it is easily doable with Xcel's existing phase 1 per the most recent Public Utilities Commission ruling phase one virtual power plant capabilities. This could be made larger if we involved our commercial and industrial much the same way that Arizona Public Service did here. If that is the case, we are talking a matter of months to get this up and running, even if it isn't quite the ideal version of a virtual power plant. That said, I think the virtual power plant itself could at least be better jointly coordinated by an SEU and by more involvement with the community. This could be the focus of the prime time VPP, but it is not clear to me that it is, and especially with Boulder participating as a sustainable energy utility yet. Arizona Public Service is now moving this to the next level of including solar plus storage, the same way that Boulder is contemplating. Their system I would classify as being one that is called a hierarchical distributed virtual power plant. We'll get to that a little bit in a moment. However, I will note that it appears to me that distributed energy resource owners in Arizona are treated more or less as though they were typical demand response customers rather than Colorado's prosumer model. This is something we would not want to carry over here. This is an example based on what would be called a decentralized distributed virtual power plant, and it is a behind-the-meter battery program that is in Hawaii today. I want you to note the flow of cash here from the utility to the prosumers, at least by Colorado's definition, through the virtual power plant, which could be facilitated by the sustainable energy utility. As mentioned, Colorado's recent law, and again, that would, if you want to look that up, that is State Bill SB 24-218, and rulings at the PUC, most recently the 23M-0466 EG, are clear that the distribution system operator must at least allow for third-party VPP aggregators, and their participants must be treated as prosumers able to compete on the wholesale electricity market for their services no later than 2030. So this is a busy slide, and I'm not going to ask you to absorb it all in one look here, but I will go over it briefly. I believe that the Boulder Primetime VPP is entirely utility orchestrated by Xcel Energy on the far right. And at the moment, I'm not sure that there's any third party during phase one. However, according to the PUC decision, phase two will move to where third party aggregators, if you notice on the left, are allowed. I'll call this a centralized vertical model. And I'm not clear exactly, again, on what Boulder's role has in this scheme at present, or if it can change their role to possibly act as a facilitator, as I have placed the SEU here. I am comparing this model to something like an old IBM mainframe, if those of you remember those, or better yet, the early Mac computers. In those models, the software and the hardware on those were all proprietary and provided all by the same party. They aren't exactly open architectures, and they trade freedom and flexibility for simplicity on the utilities side in this case. That said, even Apple had to open up their platform enough to allow for third-party providers to supply apps. As mentioned earlier, Arizona Public Service is in the middle or decentralized hierarchical model. This is like most other programmable computers that you have or can buy today with your choice in both hardware and operating system. Obviously, this is more flexible, but is more complex, at least conceptually. And lastly, the Hawaiian model. This is what I referred to earlier as a decentralized distributed model. This is more flexible and it is more complex, at least conceptually. However, this allows for peer-to-peer of direct energy services trading. This is more like an Internet of Things and is much more conducive to plug and play, but requires, again, more complexity. To recap, as discussed here or shown here, numbers 4 and 5 below, the integrate into utility planning and incentives, and 5, integrate into wholesale markets, is going on here in Colorado today. Number 3, increased standardization in VP virtual power plant operations is going on at the Institute of Electronic and Electrical Engineers and other national standards committee. We're working on the interoperability part. A lot of hard work and effort has gone into these, and now it's time for the rest of us to take up the mantle on items 1 and 2. It's time to get after them. Let's go, folks. So here we back to the last slide again, and we're putting it all together for you. Phase 1 again starts with a pilot CVP based on a simple thermostat program that includes pre-enrollment at point of purchase. Here, wrinkles in compensation and ownership and so forth can be worked out, while the technical details of device orchestration, accountability, and interoperability is still sort of simple and not a complicating part of the VPP solution. We want to focus here on expanding adoption and simplifying the enrollment, especially for CNI and the underserved. It should be a good opportunity for learning for our sustainable energy utility and our community partnerships with the operating utilities and third-party providers or other aggregators. Concurrently, we should plan and time quantity buys and placements of solar and storage for behind the meter and with bidirectional capability. And we should do these through the Sustainable Energy Utility or other similar third-party partners like the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority at reduced government borrowing rates. This would all be a part of a strategic plan with an eye towards future virtual power plants. Prioritize this through an open process, identifying qualifying faith communities, underserved, commercial and industrial partnerships, and yes, emergency microgrids or resiliency hubs, as the state is calling them and asking us to do. Include strategically selected community solar projects as utility scale non-wires alternatives, which is again grid speak for value-added grid services. Such non-wire alternatives, NWAs, have a process and a standard cost-benefit method here in Colorado. As a matter of fact, it comes from Xcel. This sustainable energy utility here works with the community and the distribution system operator to prioritize the selection of the co-optimized locations in the CNI and underserved neighborhoods and any weak points we may find in the distribution system across the board. Again, this can be done in partnership with both our utility and the CETA. All of these could be done with any number of other entities and third parties. For instance, and not necessarily an endorsement, please, Pivot Energy, a local company, already has experience with community solar and power purchase agreements. Similarly, Uplight, again, not an endorsement, and also a local company, has plenty of experience with thermostat pre-enrollment programs, while its backer Schneider Electric has plenty of experience with designing microgrids all over the world. Namaste and so many other local installers that you probably know and love well have solar plus storage leasing programs and more. So the SEU can farm out quite a bit, including the planning. Again, for instance, with the CETA. Distributions planning and NWA evaluation, even procurement, can be done in partnership with them. The list of partners, especially local partners, we hear and know and love in Boulder and can trust. That sets the table for phase 2 here at the bottom. This is where it all starts to come together, where we transition to our community VPPs, which include the solar plus storage and vehicle to everything within a network of existing microgrids, and those technologies and our experience with VPPs is then more mature, and we're finally off to the races. So, to conclude, Boulder can best align its grid energy objectives and goals with its energy planning and execution through a coordinating sustainable energy utility. Prosumer distributed energy resources can play a significant role in filling these gaps in that process in a local and community-oriented way. Prosumer-based community virtual power plants empower our community to co-invest in its grid and meet the community's objectives and goals. CVPPs, including networks of microgrids, are potentially a powerful economic, health, and well-being multiplier for our community. And thank you. And I am a track guy. So this is what I call spike up time. It's go time. And I am also a very passionate about health, and net zero equals a health hero. So please think global, act global, and peace.
Jim, thank you very much. This is Chris Hoffman with Empower Our Future, and I'd like to encourage people to put their questions in the Q&A. But just to start off, Jim, you've said that it sounds like kind of the bottom line is that Boulder could establish a sustainable energy utility, and your recommendation is to start small with resources that are already available or potentially available, and that this could be doable under the phase one of Xcel's virtual power plant plan. Um, and
Yes,
good. And you've also said that the a virtual power plant or sustainable energy utility for Boulder could provide real um, resilience and financial benefits, both resilience and financial benefits for businesses and homeowners. And um,
yes.
and so I guess the first question is, so I'm a homeowner here in Boulder. I have an EV and solar panels, and I'm an Xcel customer. So how potentially would I interact with a Boulder sustainable energy utility?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that again?
Yeah, sure. I say I'm a homeowner here in Boulder.
Okay. Yes.
I have an EV and I have solar panels, and I'm an Xcel customer. So if Boulder were to set up a sustainable energy utility, how would I interact with that?
There's a couple of ways that this could happen. First of all, a VPP has to be formed in one regard or the other. So the sustainable energy utility could facilitate VPPs to form. What I'm suggesting here is one that is a community-based virtual power plant, and that could be, for instance, there is a local farmers co-op or a rural co-op VPP that is forming. That could be one you could join. There also may be others depending on what third-party aggregators we can bring to the show. And this is where the SEU would come into play in identifying here are some VPP candidates that you, the average Boulder citizen, can join. Um, and that's why I'm suggesting, at least for now, that this is a phase two. When you start getting to these more sophisticated parts, the VPP that we have going on in pilot is right now not open to third parties, to my understanding. Does that answer your question?
Well, I'm just trying to think ahead. If there
Yeah.
were, would I sign an agreement with the VP with a sustainable
Yes, you
energy
would. Oh,
utility?
I'm sorry. Oh,
Yeah.
yes, you would become a member. You could become a member of the VPP or sign some
Okay.
sort of agreement. Correct. And
Yeah.
in a way, what you're doing is something like what a someone who's bringing building a utility scale solar panels might sign a similar style agreement, or at least
Uh-huh.
that's what a smart prosumer should be doing,
Okay.
so that you can trade your energy resources on the open market and get returns for your services. Um,
Okay. So my understanding then is that the sustainable energy utility would be the intermediary, and
correct.
potentially um, it would write checks to me at some point.
That
Um,
may or may not be true, but
uh-huh.
it at least could identify here are third parties that Boulder has identified as qualifying and working on our grid. And
Mhm.
that would be done in cooperation with, of course, whoever are the operating utilities. Um, but
And it's
yes,
and it sounds like the more once you had a critical mass of like homeowners or businesses with, say, their own batteries or something like that signed up, then it would start being benefits to everybody because there would be this resilience resource on the grid. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes. And
Great.
and so going back to the Arizona thermostat
Hmm.
VPP, they had a record heat wave in 2023.
Hmm.
They have somewhere like in the neighborhood of 90,000 thermostats enrolled
Hmm.
through this program. And that's the equivalent to powering 38,000 homes.
Uh-huh. So
So,
there's a lot of potential here to have essentially a lot of small entities combined to make a huge resource that would be very beneficial to
yeah,
everybody.
I find it incredible when you start talking about that. Um, and here's another example of one that is getting started now in Texas. Just to put a scale to this, they are planning on 1 gigawatt by 2035, but they will
Mm.
be well ahead of the 190 megawatts we just saw from Arizona. And here's what the 1 gigawatt buys you. That's 12 gas powered peaker plants.
Mhm.
That's 294 wind turbines, and that's 1.9 million solar panels. And we're
And this and
just
this
talking about thermostats.
that's just thermostats. So potentially we could all have a small piece of cleaning up at lowering rates, providing resilience and cleaning up our atmosphere.
Right,
Great.
right.
So let me go now to some of the questions that are coming in on the Q&A.
Yes.
Here's one from Alan Best, and from Big Pivots. And
So Alan Best asks, help me understand how the new VPP-based utilities would be modeled upon the structure of the CETA. I understand that the CETA has bonding authority that allows it to actually get stuff built and at lower cost. How would this structure work in the case of VPPs in a place like Boulder? You explained it, but I had trouble grasping it. Alan Best, Big Pivots. Yes, again, Alan, sorry if I was confusing. So I have two entities here that we're talking about. And the sustainable energy utility would be more like a local level version of the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority. VPPs can be separate. They can be any third party. Again, I mean, here, like we have here, Renew Home and the local energy company, NRG, combined for this. And here, Colorado, we have right now several different companies that are um, in the game on starting VPPs. So yes, the SEU would be the one who could be modeled after the CETA or even work in conjunction with the CETA for bonding authority to allow us to get this stuff and get it built. Um, and in the case of the VPP itself, the SEU, as I explained earlier, could help identify who are some of the best parties that work best with our grid and with our grid operators. Hopefully that answers your questions. Next question. Um, so who owns the DERMS in a CVP? The utility or okay, a utility or a subgroup of the utility's prosumers? That's an excellent question. In it, I'm going to try to pull up this model over here.
and Jim, for the rest of us, maybe you could define what DERMs are.
Oh yeah, again with the acronym alphabet soup. And Jan Peterson, this is a great question. Distributed energy resource management system is what a DERMS is. It is a what do I want to call it? An enterprise system that the utility typically owns for controlling the grid resources. So in this case, we have operators who have to turn the switch on and say, yes, I need to dispatch 20 megawatts of your virtual power plant right now. And so this is where the distributed energy resource management system comes into play. That said, that can be owned by uh, um, anybody, but it depends on what the system is. Right now, again, in Colorado, with at least with Xcel's model, it is going to be Xcel. They are, I believe, working with Itron And if there's someone from Xcel who knows better out there listening, you can tell me. But they are working with Itron. Itron has something that can work on both, if you're looking at the screen here, both the right-hand side of the vertically integrated and the left side of the decentralized hierarchical architecture, so that third parties and even OEM VPP platforms could be used to interface with the DERMS. So there's grid edge and there's utility side DERMS. Gets complicated, folks. I think ideally what we would prefer is something that's open source and something that's approaching the far left-hand corner that Hawaii has. And that is something that is operating in Europe. So the previously mentioned DERMS program, it's not really a DERMS, it is a open source control. Leslie Glistrom, thank you. Could you discuss the New Orleans example in more detail? Who owns the centers? How are they financed? How do they interact with the incumbent utility? I don't know. This was really mind-blowing to me and really touched me, I have to say. So the faith community here got together, and I don't know. It's Josh Cox is currently the key point person on this, as far as I know. And you're certainly go to their website and take a look at togethernola.org. But what they put together was the churches own the facilities, but they did have to, like our churches, they're not made of money, and so they did get some grants through both the city and the state. And federal grants to build these resiliency hubs that they coordinated together. The resiliency hubs, these churches, are actually placed within 15 minutes walking distance from anywhere within the city. So there's more than one of these placed, and it also includes some critical care centers and senior centers and things of that nature. These are, these are like nanogrids, if you want to call it that, or microgrids, but it is just one building, let's just say, or at least one premises, the church premises, and they co-located here. They're solar. Many of them already had solar, but not all of them had batteries, and that's what you see here in this picture in the lower right-hand corner. And so now they are talking with the city and with the state about trying to turn this into a virtual power plant and allow the church members and other members of the community to become members of that virtual power plant. How did they interact with the incumbent utility? And again, this was done in coordination with the incumbent utility, but much like Boulder, these were behind the meter batteries, just to be clear. So these batteries right now, they can't share the energy resources on their batteries. They can only share the energy resources on their solar panels. That's the same is true here in Boulder right now. Again, you would have to get a permit if you want to do that, and then Xcel lets you, at least for safety reasons, you can't just hook up a battery and then have the grid go down and have somebody come out and try to work the lines, and then suddenly everybody's battery is charging the line. So we have to be sure that they're behind the meter and that it's safe. So this is by permit. It is allowed. It was allowed in Louisiana. It's allowed here. And so again, I don't know if there was they didn't talk a lot about there being a contentious relationship with their incumbent utility in this case. So again, it was a life-saving opportunity here, and it performed beyond their expectations after Hurricane Francine.
Great, thank you. We have a question coming from Paul on the panel here, and he asks, what happens to my thermostat when the utility calls for power?
There's a difference between the thermostat that might be in a typical demand response program and one that might be in a virtual power plant, especially one that is relying on grid edge if you will, versus utility side. So what I mean by grid edge is where the real time is understood at on premises. That is, you have a meter, you have the weather, you have even a smart thermostat that knows what's going on, what your habits might even be. And then there's the alternative, which tends to be the demand response that we have right now, where they just say, I need you all to cut X amount, and you can cut X amount. Now, here's where the difference comes in. Of course, with the virtual power plant, we can coordinate that for providing more grid services. Obviously, if you know what's going on in real time, not everybody's thermostat has to be turned on at the same time or turned off at the same time, for instance. Again, people can opt out. Let's say, yeah, okay, I understood, I signed this, but you're cutting my temperature too much. So I'm going to bump out. Now, do you get any of the rewards? You may not get as many rewards since you bumped out. So that's kind of the thing that you can get better with a virtual power plant versus a demand response. Hopefully that answers your question.
Great. Okay, I have a question of my own here. It has to do with compensation. So the prosumer who is participating in a CVPP, what kind of compensation is likely? Is it such that they might be incentivized to actually invest in resources to support the CVPP, or will it just be sort of incidental?
The answer is kind of a yes. And Bill Althouse may be listening, but he could probably tell you better. But this all depends on the agreement that the VPP signs with its members, and the agreement that the VPP signs with the utility. So in that case, if it's assuming it's a third party. So if I were to have what I'm calling here for a community VPP, the members decide how they are going to compensate each other based on whatever what amounts to a glorified power provider agreement that they have with the utility. So the utility says, you will provide us with X amount. You are accountable for X amount of interoperable devices, and that those devices need to deliver this amount of power when we ask for a dispatch or a curtailment, if you will, of the services. And so that's one thing that makes it a key. The other part of it is, though, we also want a locational. Not every VPP has to be activated if it's just one small spot on the grid that requires that. In which case, those members will be compensated at wholesale market prices, depending on what their agreement is with their VPP. And again, a CVPP can decide that between themselves. Third-party VPPs, like some of these others with may be compensated no better than a demand response program. So we need to watch out for that.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Leslie saying that Jim says that Colorado law allows sharing of solar. I'm unaware of this provision. Could you provide specific reference?
Oh, I'm sorry. So right now we can connect to the grid with our solar panels, and if I'm using the words incorrectly, I apologize. We can share our solar right now. We are sharing our solar. I'm sharing my solar on the grid, and so I'm compensated for that. So hopefully that's clear. I don't know how more clear to make it.
Okay, great. I think that probably clears that up. And then the next question is from Bill Althouse. You may want to just read through that yourself so you can absorb that, and you reference Bill in a previous comment.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Prosumers earn multiple payments for their full distributed energy resource value stack, not just the power. And that's what I want to be clear, that the value proposition Oh, let me go back to see if I trying to remember what slide I had on the value proposition here. Yeah, I actually have a couple of slides on the value proposition. As you can see, there's a value proposition that affects community, affects the transmission and distribution infrastructure, affects reliability and resilience, resource adequacy, affordability, right? I mean, all of these are providing some sort of value proposition. And so this is what Bill is referring to as the full value stack, not just the power that you're providing. So can you explain the capacity, ancillary services, and wires deferral payments that add to the power? And that's what this slide is describing. So for instance, if I can ask for a curtailment of energy, and by exercising some behind the meter resources, for instance, batteries. So let's say we have a peak power coming in, and either thermostat or battery. Thermostat, your house is actually acts a bit like a battery. So either the thermostat or the battery says, okay, well, we need to cut back on our energy use, or in the case of the battery, we're going to shut off from the grid and reduce our energy use. You've just increased the efficiency of the system. You've smoothed the peak. You've alleviated the congestion. And that is a grid service. That isn't necessarily where you actually provided power to the system. It's actually a place where you ended up providing a service in alleviating the congestion or smoothing the peaks.
Great, thank you. And I invite others to add additional questions as we move along. And Leslie has yet another, and she says, I would refer to our current situation in Colorado with solar as net metering, but solar owners cannot share their solar directly with their neighbors.
That is, I'm sorry, that is correct, and that's here. I had a slide earlier, and this is the prosumer here example that I alluded to in the middle. And in this case, yes, we are compensated and weekly, and we have a passive interaction with our grid. That is true. We are not really compensated for the full value stack of what we're putting out there. And we also are creating a problem through the net metering. So this is, again, something that I tried to describe earlier. And the change would be to a system that has the smart prosumer.
Great. Okay. So Alan Bess has another question. What happens next as regards VPPs within the context of Colorado?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm hoping we move a little faster here in Colorado, Alan. I believe that there's a lot of other states, including Texas, Utah, obviously Arizona, that are starting to move very quickly in this arena. So there is several programs out there. Holy Cross Energy. I would view Holy Cross's system. If I can pull up one of the slides. Holy Cross Energy is probably one of the leaders, but theirs is more of this vertically integrated model where they even own the distributed energy resources. I think we would prefer, and I think the PUC is trying to move towards something that is towards the middle here of this decentralized hierarchical, or even I would hope that we move towards the peer-to-peer and Internet of Things level here for VPPs. If that's sort of what you're looking at, the crystal ball though on how soon that will happen, I think it could happen before 2030 or even 2030. Sometime for sure. We'll have something going after 2030.
Well, you've gotten us all excited about the possibilities that exist with SEUs and VPPs. Why aren't we doing that? What keeps us from doing that right now? What actions, those of us that are listening here in Colorado, where do we apply the pressure? Where do we, is it the legislature, the PUC? Is it an instance where it's different between, say, a co-op or a municipal utility and those of us that live in an investor-owned utility? The territory, how do you suggest we move forward?
That's a great question. This took me a year to to get this far, and I still feel like a neophyte. Um, this is not an easy concept to start selling to the public, right? It took me this long to get this far on here. Um, so I do think that again, starting as simple as possible, and I think Boulder can be one of the leaders here in our state in getting this ball rolling and showing how we can get her done here. Um, and right now at the PUC, there's what do I want to say that there was already a decision made in the previously cited PUC case, and I forgot the number, that said that at least Xcel Energy, for instance, has to have a phase one, again, going back here to the right, of a VPP where they could be allowed to use what's called the distributed energy resource management system that they have now that is mostly demand response. And then in phase two, they have to go to to one that allows for third party aggregators and can handle grid edge communication better. So we're so close. It's tantalizing. So again, I would say look for what Boulder's primetime pilot is going to do. We're going to need to keep the pressure on the city and our city leaders to give prosumers a chance and to give the community a chance to take part in this and to learn more about it and learn how we can contribute as a team.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Jim. And Rick Casey says, do you have a newsletter or blog that updates local developments in VPPs?
Oh my God, Rick, that would be a great idea. No, this already getting this far was already took me a year, as I said. That's a great idea, and I'd love to get together. I've already recruited some local neighbors here, and I have a little community group here. We got together and bought. We've got a whole bunch of houses on my block with solar panels. So I just created what I called a climate change support group, and so that group is just my neighborhood. But I would send me an email, I guess. Love to help out and add you to the message board in that group, because I am going to keep my little group up to date on what we can do, at least in our neighborhood.
A couple from Scott and one from RJ Harrington. Let me just go ahead and read Scott's first one. Is the cost of deploying a VPP to generate energy on community rooftops less expensive than Xcel providing zero emissions energy generated from utility scale solar and wind plants many miles away from Boulder?
That is a loaded question. Going back to an earlier slide. Here we go. So there were a couple of reports that I was referencing here on this. And the Colorado Energy Office did a report and found that the last few percent, if you will, of getting from 96% to 100% clean by 2040 would be about on the utility scale side would be a 40 to 43%. I think it was 43% more than current policy. Whereas looking at more distributed energy resource focused or distribution side focused deployments would be on the order of 30% more. So what, maybe a little cheaper, if you will. But the caveat again was that in the case of the utility scale, that's something where everyone gets the utility puts that in, the utility recoups all of their investment, they're guaranteed on that investment. Whereas in the case of the distributed energy resources, that is not actually a cost that goes out to the ratepayers. That is a cost that goes out, that is being sourced by distributed energy resource owners. And so this is where the compensation has to come in to be sure that they are compensated appropriately for what we call saving the day. And again, virtual power plants in separate studies by the Brattle Group for both Colorado and for national level studies do indicate that virtual power plants can save a considerable amount of more money versus standard transmission and distribution or other types of traditional infrastructures. So, and that again was not including the value of resilience that's added.
Okay, Scott provided a loaded question here for you. In other words, economically, why wouldn't Xcel deploy this system, own the system, and lower costs and increase zero emission electricity?
They have actually tried to propose that to the state of Minnesota. They called it a direct capacity procurement program, and there they would be the owners of all of the distributed energy resources. Colorado has already gone down the path of allowing prosumers to participate in the wholesale electricity market, and that is a something that is part of the VPP law and regulation that we're in right now. So yes, Xcel, I think it may be obvious through the Primetime project, wanted to own and lead the virtual power plant program in Boulder. However, the PUC suggested that they need to allow for third-party aggregators in the next phase.
Okay, great. So Paul has a question back to thermostats. How would the utility measure the amount of power provided? I assume the compensation is based on megawatt power capacity provided.
Yes, that's a great question. So a lot of that has to do with, again, where are the smart meters and where is that metering come from? So in a lot of demand response systems, it's a little blind. So they just ask for a reduction and they hope they get it if you don't have smart meters. And in the case of for instance, commercial and industrial, they in demand management systems, they do have something that's right at the meter and in some cases right on the equipment. So in the case of most smart thermostats and most of these smart virtual power plant plans that you might see with coming out of what is it, the smart home or Renew Home, Renew Home, those will be right at the meter, so and even right at the thermostat, so you will know how much you're cutting back, etc., almost in real time.
So let me just drill down right to the nitty gritty. So for do people who have NIST thermostats, will those be adequate, or will there have to be yet another thermostat installed in order to participate?
That depends on the who is the virtual power plant aggregator and who isn't. Right now, I believe that Xcel's demand response program, for instance, is pretty simple, and it's stuff, thermostats you can buy at Home Depot or at McGuckins. So those, yeah, those, it isn't a special thermostat. I mean, yes, it's ones that are at least compatible with their system in terms of communication, but no, you don't have to get say the Renew Homes AI controlled, and thermostat.
I'm going to thank Jim for an excellent presentation. We have a number of people still in attendance, speaking to your ability to keep us informed and engaged, and speaking to the interests of your audience, Jim. A job well done. And I'm so glad this is recorded, because there is a lot of information on these slides that will reveal itself under scrutiny. And I appreciate your work in presenting this material to us.
Yes, I'm putting it all out there, and I am open. Please, whatever I missed or whatever I misspoke on, I am totally willing to to fix it. I'm hoping that I've put together something here, though, that is workable, provides some hope, and is fair to everybody.
Let me take this moment to thank the Empower Our Future communication team. The members who are integral to making these Empower Hours happen are Paul Cullen, Chris Hoffman, Steve Whitaker, and Julie Zonizer. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And Jim, thank you so much for a really interesting talk. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, guys.
Great. Well, thank you, Jim, and we'll say goodnight and allow you to continue with your evening. And thanks to all who have attended and listened to this excellent presentation by Jim Gilbert. Good night.